In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how to play hammer-ons and pull-offs on guitar. This is the first of the technique lessons from series 3 of my beginner's course. For the rest of this series, we're going to learn a bunch of techniques which is going to prepare you to play the riffs and songs coming in series 4. Hammer-ons and pull-offs allow you to play notes without actually picking them, meaning you can play faster and more efficiently. Now they also have a slightly different sound, and when you get used to working songs out by yourself, you can start to train your ear to hear whether notes are played with a pick or with one of these techniques. These are sometimes referred to as legato techniques. Legato generally means just to play smoothly, whereas hammer-ons and pull-offs are specific to guitar. You can't hammer on or pull off on a piano, for example. But because of the way the technique works, there can't be any gaps between the notes, so they come out sounding really smooth anyway, which is why they get classed as legato techniques. You can find guitar tabs for all the exercises in this lesson and the following technique lessons as well via my Patreon page through the link in the description. You'll also find the link to the Series 3 playlist there as well. But without further ado, let's get started. So we're going to start with hammer-ons, which allow you to play notes that are higher in pitch without picking by hammering a finger down onto that note. Here's an example of a hammer-on. So I pick the note first, then hammer the finger down, and the note can change without actually having to pick twice. So keep an eye on my right hand, you'll see I only pick once, then hammer the finger down, and it changes to that higher note. So let's zoom in and see how this is done. So for this first example, I'm starting with first finger on the 5th fret of the high E string, and I'm using the 3rd finger to hammer on to the 7th fret. 3rd finger is quite a strong finger, so it's a good one to start practicing hammer-ons with. So here we go, pick the 5th fret first, then hammer the 3rd finger down, and you can hear that hammered note. Now the first important thing to note is that it has to be a hammer action with the 3rd finger. You can't simply just put the 3rd finger down on the note, otherwise you won't generate enough velocity for a strong sounding note. You have to try and really throw the finger at it, even if it's not too controlled. Sometimes you might miss the right string and hit some of the other strings, but that's fine. Just try and generate enough power and the accuracy will come with time. If I just turn to the side a little bit and show you what I mean. So here's my first note. And then look how far away my finger is. I'm trying to get enough of an angle so I can really throw the finger at the note and get it to ring out strongly. So that's an important thing to note about hammer-ons. You also want to aim to use the finger tip to hammer onto the note rather than the fleshy underside of the finger, just because it's more solid, so you're more likely to get a good sounding note. And I would start with this 5th to 7th fret exercise on the top string first. Try to pick it fairly gently and then do the hammer and try and keep the same volume with the hammer, like so. If you find that the hammered note is sounding a bit quieter than the picked note, try and pick a little bit more gently and hammer a little bit more solidly until they both sound the same. If you're on electric guitar, it might help to put a little bit of gain or overdrive on. That will help you out with getting the volume of the hammer. If you're on acoustic, obviously you don't have that option. It might take a little bit more work, but still worth putting the time in to train your fingers up. And one final point, you should aim to do a hammer-on where you can sustain the hammered note like this. Here that note keeps ringing out. It's not like I just hammer it and then it disappears straight away. Sometimes you might have to do that on purpose in a song, but I think for the purpose of this exercise, try and get that sustained note, and then at least you've got the option of holding that note if you need to. Once you're comfortable with the hammer on the top string and it's sounding pretty decent, try moving to the G string and using the same frets. That would sound like this. That'll just give you a little bit of variety in how you're practicing and aiming for different strings. You might find at first that you don't hit the G string, you might get this going too high or too low and just generally missing it, and it might sound like a little bit of a mess, but just work on the accuracy through trial and error and get used to hammering on the G string and the other strings as well. And the final hammer-on exercise is to hammer from the open G string to the 2nd fret like this. Sometimes in songs you've got to do hammer-ons from the open string, so I think it's worth practicing. And you can also experiment with using different fingers here and naturally go for the 2nd finger because it feels most comfortable for me. But I could use the 1st finger, or the 3rd, I'd probably avoid trying to use the little finger at this early stage, maybe bring that in once you've got a little bit more experience. But yeah, just a good one for trying out the different fingers. Maybe a different one will feel more comfortable for you, but just give it a go. And again, try and get that sustained note, so you know you're in control exactly of how you're playing the note and you can adapt it to the song. Now it's time to look at pull-offs, which allow you to play a lower note in pitch by flicking the finger away, causing the string to vibrate. So here's an example. I'm going to pick the higher note first, flick the finger away, and you can hear it changes to that lower note. One more time, watch my right hand. I'm picking first, right hand stays still, finger flicks away to the lower note. So let's have a look at how this is done. So for pull-offs, we're basically going to do the same exercises as the hammer-ons, but in reverse. So we're going to start with that 5th and 7th fret on the top string. Now for the pull-off, make sure you've got both fingers fretting the 5th fret and 7th fret first, because if the first finger isn't down, then when you pull off with the 3rd finger, there isn't going to be a note there to hear. So it's going to sound like this. Picking the 7th fret first, flicking that 3rd finger off, and then I'm hearing the note that the first finger's holding. Now it's really important that it is a flicking motion rather than just lifting the finger up. If I turn to the side, you can see this a little bit better. So I'm going to pick the note first, and I'm actually going to flick the finger down a little bit, like that. Whereas if I just lift the finger off, you can hear I get a really weak note. Whereas I want it to sound the same volume as the picked note. So that comes from that downward flick where I can generate a little bit more power on the string. Just like with the hammer-ons, try and use a little bit more of your fingertip rather than the fleshy part of your finger, and try and get that second note to sustain. Once you're comfortable on the top string, move over to the G string, same exercise, 5th and 7th fret. You'll probably find a couple more challenges on this string because we've got strings physically underneath the fingers, and there's always the risk of flicking your 3rd finger into those strings and getting this kind of sound. So actually making the top strings ring out, and I'll show you how to deal with that. So when your first finger's playing the 5th fret, the underside of my first finger is going to touch the B string and E string, but not press them down hard enough to actually get a note out them. It's just resting on them top 2 strings and muting them, so that when the 3rd finger does the pull off, even if I hit that B string, it's not going to actually make a noise. And then the direction of the 3rd finger has to be kind of diagonal. Again, if I just lift the finger up, I don't get the best sounding note. Whereas if I flick off the string, kind of downwards, then I get a good sounding pull off note. So it's just about experimenting and finding what works for you, but try and get that good sounding note where it's all consistent and sustains under the first finger as well. Finally, on the G string, try and pull off from the 2nd fret to the open string. So here I am with 2nd finger on 2nd fret, and then pull off to open. Again, you get this in songs sometimes, so it's worth practicing. Important thing to know about this exercise is that if you do a big pull off like you did previously, you are going to hit the open strings, which obviously sounds really messy. Because we're pulling off to the open string, we don't have the first finger to rest on the higher strings and mute them, so there's a little bit more technique going on here. What I tend to do to get around this is to just pull off with the 3rd finger but rest it on the next string. So in this case it's going to be rested on the B string. See how I'm just resting on that B string there. So if I pick that string, you're not going to hear anything ring out, so I can still do the pull off and keep it nice and clean and tidy without the open strings ringing out as well. And your final challenge, which I only want you to attempt once you've got all the previous exercises sounding good and feeling comfortable, is to start combining hammer-ons and pull-offs in the 3 positions we've looked at. So if we start with the 5th and 7th frets on the top string, I'm only going to pick this once. I know you can't see my right hand, but I'm just going to pick that 5th fret, then I'm going to hammer on, then pull off, hammer on, pull off, and just keep that going. Now you might find at first that the notes die out pretty quickly, but the more you practice it, the more you'll build up that strength and stamina and be able to do consistent hammer-ons and pull-offs. It's really important that you start doing this really slowly and clearly. The note quality is a lot more important than speed, especially at first. But once you've got the note quality and it's comfortable and it's ringing out nicely every time and your notes are all sustaining, then try and build up the speed a little bit. And when you get fast enough, you can create these kind of trill effects. As I said at the start of the lesson, normally these techniques are used when the music gets a little bit faster because it saves a little bit of effort in the right hand, creates a bit more efficiency. If I move that to the G string, and especially with the open string, you can get these really fast kind of trill effects if you work on the speed as well as the quality. Never sacrifice quality for speed, only go as fast as you can play the notes clearly. And from here onwards, you can start to create your own little hammer-on and pull-off exercises. Try and include other fingers and other positions on the guitar and just sort of build that familiarity with the technique. Obviously, in the songs that we're going to look at in the next series, there's going to be lots of scenarios where you have to use these techniques as well, which is really going to help you get used to them. So I hope that's helped you understand how hammer-ons and pull-offs work on guitar and enabled you to get started practicing them. Remember, you can download tabs for all the exercises in this lesson and the following technique lessons via my Patreon page through the link in the description. All the lessons are nice and organised on my YouTube channel page, so feel free to subscribe if you want to follow along. And in the next few lessons, we're going to learn some more techniques, so I'll see you there.